Amen. Well, it's Mother's Day. Is everybody excited about that? Everyone bring your mom? My first Mother's Day experience, I think I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I was at a McDonald's. I don't know why we were at a McDonald's on Mother's Day, but we were. And we walk in, and they give my mom a carnation, just like you ladies got this morning. And I go, Mom, don't they do it right here? That's class. That was like my first kind of like memory of Mother's Day, McDonald's, and it's classy. So welcome, and that's how we roll around here, classy carnation. So hope you guys enjoy that, yeah. But the thing about my mom was that she was a person that always forgave. All right, I don't know if you guys had a mom like this. You would say stuff like, I hate you, and I never want to see you ever again in my entire life. And then, she would still wake up the next morning, serve you breakfast, and, still love you and serve you, because that's kind of what moms do. They love deeply for no reason other than the fact that you came out of her, right? I mean, that's just the reality of, how moms deeply love. And this morning, I'm hoping and praying that we could transition that sort of love to more than just family or maybe just kids, because until you get kids, you don't realize all that your mom did for you. And now that I'm a dad, I'm like, holy cow, she really loved me. So we're in this series. If you're new to church or haven't been to Wells Branch in a while, here's kind of where we're at. We're in the story of Joseph, and it's from Genesis. And the great thing about Joseph is no matter how bad you've had it, you haven't had it worse than Joseph. All right, you haven't. I promise you, it hasn't been worse. All right? No matter how good you've had it or how good you're going to get it, you won't ever have it as good as Joseph. And then this morning, we're going to show you, he had more opportunity to get back at those who hurt him than you ever will have, and he still chose to do the same thing he always chose to do. He just did what anybody would do that was confident that God was with him. So you guys remember, first off, Joseph was the chosen child of, he had 10 older brothers, and he was the favorite son of the favorite wife. Some of you understand that. And he kind of was just kind of loved. In fact, his dad gave Joseph the coat of many colors. Joey, stand up. It kind of looked like this, actually. So whenever he rolled in, that was kind of like, thanks, Joey. And he'd be like, oh, there's Joey. Isn't he sweet? Put the coat of many colors on him. And he was like the chosen kid. And all the brothers were just getting angry and angry. And Joseph did dreams. Joseph was a dream interpreter. And so, he would wake up every morning telling people about his dreams, and they would usually revolve around his brothers bowing down to him. And so if you're the youngest kid, talking about how your older brothers are going to be one day bowing down to you, it doesn't go over very well. And especially if you're the favorite kid, you kind of have a little tattletale issue, which, Joseph did. And when he was 17, Joseph, things went bad for him. His brothers got this great idea that they would first throw him into a pit. It was like a funny joke. Hey, let's throw him into this pit. Stinks to be you. And they were he'd be like, hey guys, come on, let me out. And they'd be like, okay, let's let him out. Let's not kill him. I know, let's sell him. And so they sell him into slavery. And so these Ishmaelite slave traders come down. They pick him up. They give a couple shekels. And then they cruise on down to Egypt. And they get down to Egypt. They sell him to Potiphar. And here's what we learn about Joseph. Joseph simply does what anybody would do who was sold into slavery, rejected by his brothers, that was confident that God was with him. And he becomes the hardest working slave on the planet. And then he moves up the ranks of slavery, and he becomes head of the house, right? And then next thing you know, he gets accused of a crime and then convicted of that crime he had the very courage not to commit. So his master's wife wants to get a little action. He says no, and she is scorned. She calls the police, and Potiphar, the master, says, you got to take care of this guy. Well, he gets thrown into prison, and he's now in a dungeon. And in a dungeon, he simply does what anybody do that was confident that God was with him, who was hanging out in a dungeon, was the warden's lackey. And so he serves the prison warden faithfully, and he works really, really hard. There's no upward mobility. He is he's at the peak of existence, being the prison warden's lackey, never to see the light of day again. But he simply does what anybody would do that was confident that God was with him, and he starts to minister to other people. Which is crazy. I mean, when you're down, you don't care about other people, right? When you're down, the whole world should stop. Hey, don't you realize how bad it hurts me right now? Everybody stop doing what you're doing. It hurts, right? That's kind of how we act. We kind of like want the whole world should shut down and kind of mourn and grieve for us. That's how we roll. But that's not how Joseph rolls. He simply does what anybody would do that was confident that God was with him. And in prison, with a whole life of prison to look forward to, he starts ministering to other people. He's outward focused. He's like, I need to help out some people. That's what anybody would do that was confident that God was with him. Well, it turns out that one guy that he ministers to doesn't really differentiate between the other guy. He ministers to this cupbearer who turns out he's got connections to Pharaoh, at that time, king of the universe. And Pharaoh has a dream deal. And, Joseph does dreams. And so one day, Pharaoh can't sleep. He's like, I'm freaking out. And he, calls all the wise men, all the magicians of the, Egypt, known world. And they all come. And he's like, all right, here's my dream. And everyone's like, must have been bad pizza. I don't know. They were stuck. And so they can't figure it out. And then the cupbearer's like, I know a guy. He's a little, he's a Hebrew, and I know we don't associate with Hebrews, a little racism going on in Egypt. But they call up the little Hebrew boy, they shave him up to make him look as Egyptian as possible, bring him into the throne room, and there he has an opportunity to kind of leverage this moment for his own gain. But Joseph doesn't change his strategy. He simply does what anybody would do when faced with the ultimate opportunity if he was confident that God was with him. So Pharaoh goes to Joseph, I hear you do dreams. He's like, I can't interpret your dreams. You dress me up, you shave me up for nothing. But I know a God who can. To which, when you say it to a guy who thinks he's God, that gets a little scary. But Pharaoh, at this point, is so desperate, he doesn't care. He's like, give me what you got. And so Joseph interprets his dreams and then gives him some, advice on how to run a country, because he's been spending the past 13 years running a slave, being a head slave and being a head prison lackey. So he knows a lot about, socioeconomics and all that. So he tells Pharaoh how to run the country. And Pharaoh's like, sounds good to me. You're the guy to run it. Can we find anybody else who has the spirit of God like this guy? Nope. And so he becomes Lord over all Egypt. I mean, you want to talk about a little bit of promotion. I mean, he had hit the ceiling. The glass ceiling was more like a dungeon ceiling, and he kind of burst through it by Pharaoh's power, and now he's in charge of the entire Egyptian kingdom. Pretty amazing. And then all of a sudden, these 7 years of prosperity, because kind of what the dream that Pharaoh had was that there'd be 7 years of prosperity followed by 7 years of famine. And he had to get the country ready for that. So 7 years of prosperity go by, and then he names his children to kind of remind him of the times when it was bad. And so he has Manasseh and Ephraim, and so whenever he's, Ephraim, go long, he's thinking about, their names being, God has made me to forget my affliction and the pain of my father's house. And so it's always a reminder, playing football, playing catch, wrestling, Ephraim and Manasseh, always reminding himself of what God did in his life. He set up memorials for that. And now, this morning, we're going to talk about what happens when Joseph gets that payback opportunity. What goes around comes around. Payback is interesting. And that's what happens. And so that's where we're going to walk in. If you don't have a Bible this morning, raise your hand in the air, wave it like you do care, and a Bible will come to you. And we are so excited that you get to read the Word of God. We love God's Word. And in fact, if you don't have a Bible at all, this is our gift to you. So please take this home, enjoy it. If you have a stack of Bibles that you don't read anyway, don't take this one and add it to the stack. Just leave it on the chair after you are done. All right, so let me set this up for you. So Joseph is in Egypt ruling as prime minister. Jacob and his 10 brothers, and there's one other brother, Benjamin, which is his youngest brother. Benjamin was like 2 or something whenever Joseph at 17 was thrown into slavery. And so they're all hanging out back in Canaan. All right, so that's where we're picking up the story. And Jacob is going to kind of grumble a little bit about his 10 sons that are doing nothing. All right, here we go. Ready? And this is where we're at. Genesis chapter 42, this is page 35 of the Bibles we just handed out. Genesis 42, verse 1. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, why are you sitting around looking at each other? Like, I can just kind of imagine. They're just kind of all sitting around the front porch, jobless, don't really know what to do. They just played video games all day, and they're just kind of like, I'm kind of hungry, but there's no jobs, and there's no food, so it's another round of Call of Duty. I mean, like, that's, And he said, behold, I heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there that we may live and not die. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, which you're like, Chris, didn't you just say there were 11 brothers? Exactly. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Remember the last time he sent Joseph out to hang out with his brothers when they were shepherding the flock? They came back a little bit richer, but lacking a brother. And so he's kind of a little tentative. He's not, completely clueless. He knows that, the boys don't always get along, and he doesn't want harm to come to his favorite son from his favorite wife, which you wouldn't either. And so here we go. And so, thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now, Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves down before him with their faces to the ground. So they get on the ground, laying like prostrate, and they are like, I'm not worthy, I'm not worthy. All right, so that's kind of how they're bowing before him. And then what happens here? Watch this. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. I want you to think, God-given dreams always come true. God-given dreams always came true. So remember when Joseph was, a teenager, and he had these dreams. And the dreams were one day, these are kind of weird dreams. And again, I would go with like, that was weird pizza and I ate too late at night and probably shouldn't do that again. But he kept having sort of the same dream over and over. And the dream was like this, that his brothers would come down and bow down before him. And he was like, you know what, every time I interpret somebody's dream, it comes true. Well, how come my dream hasn't come true? If this was me, I'd be like, God, you gave me this dream that my brothers would one day come down and bow to me. And when I'm like in prison and then I'm in slavery, I'm in prison, I'm kind of like, don't see that dream happening. And then he would see other people's dreams realized. Like the cupbearer. Remember the cupbearer last week talked about him? Like his dream of like not being killed and being restored to his position in Pharaoh's house with the cush life, and all he had to do was like, there you go. And he gave the cup to Pharaoh. That's a pretty great life. And his dream came true. And everybody else's dream came true. But why? Why? Every time he turns around, seems like everybody else's dreams are coming true. Listen to me. And listen, and this comes like for those of you who are wanting to have babies and you haven't had babies yet, or you're wanting to get married and you haven't got married yet, trust me, I got married at 34. It was a long wait. All right, and then all of a sudden, it came true. Listen. God-given dreams always come true, and you don't have to do anything about it. If God has kind of put it in your heart that that's going to happen, it's going to happen. You don't have to work it. You don't have to work the magic. You don't have to kind of compromise your values. You don't have to like turn over tables and make things happen your own way. God-given dreams always come true. You know how I know this? All right, listen, I've experienced this myself. It was kind of a weird thing, so hang with me. So I was in Iraq, and I had this passion to share the gospel, and I was like, God, why would you put me here in Iraq? All I want to do is preach the gospel. Here I am commanding soldiers, and all these crazy things happen. God worked in mysterious ways. I got to lead people to Christ. It was incredible. And I had on my heart that God, I really, really, really want to preach this gospel thing to as many people as possible as soon as I get out of Iraq. And I come up with different theories on how I made friends. Like, you're gonna think I'm really weird, but I made virtual friends who became real friends later. Anyway, and we were plotting and planning and kind of making this whole thing happen. And I'm like, all right, God's gonna do this deal where we're gonna make somehow gonna make this happen, where I'm gonna get a chance to speak to at least 1,000 people or something whenever I get back. And then I was. Do you guys have moments in the shower of like epiphanies? Anybody else? Yeah. So, all right. So we had this 100, maybe it was like a 500-gallon drum of water, which had like a little spigot sort of thing. And we kind of made the water like spray out a little bit anyway, it was one of those for like 120 guys. And so one day in my it's freezing, freezing. Okay, it was one of those moments. So showering with the cold water. Like God just kind of revealed this to me. It's like, you are going to speak at this 20,000 person church in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm like, sweet. Like, that is awesome. And I was super excited. I mean, this was weird about this. I didn't know how it was all going to come about, but I knew that's what was going to happen. So I started kind of like emailing people in Atlanta, trying to get the staff on board at this massive church. And like, I'm getting nothing, nowhere, right? It was weird. I'm like, well, why is God giving me that sort of vision if that's not going to happen? So I'm just kind of a little bit frustrated, but I was like, it was clear as day. I could like almost see the entire thing come out, like me talking, there's thousands of people there, and it was going to happen. So I go on leave. So when you go on a combat tour of like a year, you get 2 weeks to go home. So I came home and I visited my grandfather, who would die about 2 months later. And I'm at his house, and his next door neighbor, I self-published a book from Iraq, and I was like, hey, this is my book, yay. And my grandfather had given it to his next door neighbor. And so I go in, I'm going to see my grandpa, and hey, grandpa, how you doing? And he totally was not into the Jesus thing, like, at all. Like, he's like, hey, I know we talked about this, but whatever you do, don't go into ministry. You can do good things for people, not ministry. Go to business, politics. We need to make some money, right? I mean, that was it. But as I'm going to see my grandpa, like, the next door neighbor's out there watering the lawn. And so he's like, oh, hey, this is Tom. I don't even remember the guy's name, Tom. And I shake his hand, and he's like, hey, I read a little bit of your book. You know who you need to meet? And I'm like, no, who do I need to meet? He's like, you need to meet Andy Stanley. And I'm like, yeah, I would love to meet Andy Stanley. I had this weird vision that I'd be at his church talking or something. He's like, you know what? I got his phone number. Here you go. I'm like, no, right? And I go, how do you have his phone number? He's like, well, my son, Tom, lives in Atlanta, and he built his house. So, yeah, they talk all the time. They hang out. They're friends. And I'm like, and this is in Dallas. Okay, so just perspective. So I get his phone number. I'm like, all right. I get his voicemail, of course. I'm like, hey, Andy, this is Chris Plekenpol. I know you've never heard of me your entire life, but I was wondering if we could do breakfast or something. I'm going to be heading back to Iraq, a very violent, dangerous place. May never come back ever again. So if we could do lunch or breakfast or something, that would mean a lot to me. But, whatever. And so then 2 hours later, I get a call back, and it's Andy. He's like, hey, Chris, I got your message. Oh my gosh, that's great. You're coming to town. Let's do breakfast. And he gives me and he said, my assistant's going to call you and organize this whole thing. And I'm like, cool. And then the assistant calls, and she gives me a lot more details, kind of like how, and all the whole thing. So I'm like, wow, I mean, Andy Stanley. All right. So then I go to meet him, and I got my book because I was really excited about sharing with him. And I totally forget about I didn't talk about my little vision thing because that would just sound way too weird, right? Because you don't, it's like, so I'm supposed to speak at your church, and the 20,000 people that you're there, that's my job. So I just didn't say anything about it. But I give him my book, and I was just excited to have breakfast with Andy Stanley. It was like if you got if LeBron James, if you're a basketball guy and LeBron James is your guy, in church world, Andy Stanley is the LeBron James. Okay, you with me? All right. So I'm so pumped about it, and I just had breakfast with Andy. And so I go back to Iraq, and I was like, man, I should have mentioned the whole dream, vision, piece. That would have been probably really effective. And I get to Iraq, and I only had 2 months left. And on my way back, so it's now August, and on my way back to Iraq, we got stuck at this little truck stop in the middle of Iraq because we had 20 flat tires. Awesome times. And while I was there, I get an email from Andy Stanley. He's like, hey, Chris, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Andy Stanley. I'm like, and I'm doing this series, and I was thinking that you could speak at my church. We got 20,000 people there, and it'd be really cool for you to share your story. And I'm like, and it happened. It was crazy. Listen. I know some of you are like, no, that. Look, especially for you skeptic type people, you're like, that stuff doesn't happen. No, it happens. God-given dreams always come true. It was the most amazing experience. And my whole thought was I just want to share this gospel with as many people as humanly possible. And the crazy thing about that, that was videoed and then went on the internet, and then people from South Africa were emailing me going, man, I just saw your video, it was amazing. See, God, listen, some of you had this God-given dream, and I'm not telling you what is God-given and what's not, but just listen. You've had this God-given dream, and you know that God's going to bring this to fruition. I want you to trust him. Because all my cajoling, all my sneaking stuff around and trying to figure it out, God didn't need that. He's the one that gave the dream. He's the one that fulfills the dream. What would you do if you're confident that God was with you? That's the question. Over and over, listen, if you could filter that question through your life, I promise you, your life would change forever. And so here's Joseph. He's kind of, when the realization of this God-given dream comes to pass, he's like, wow, it happened. Not in the timing I thought it would. Like, he's thinking at 17, he's going to have his brothers bound down, be like, what's up, right? But he couldn't handle it at 17. You guys remember how you were at 17? Yeah, all right. We don't need to go there. All right. The reality, so what happens is, the guys are bound down before him. And then Joseph, he sees that there's 10 of them, right? And so there's one missing. Where's Benjamin? So he's going to kind of devise a plan to figure out the story about Benjamin. He's like, hey, you guys are spies. We're not spies. We're honest men. He's like, no, I can tell you guys are good for nothing spies. And tell me your story. It's like, no, we're honest men. We used to have 12. There were 12 of us, but one is no more, and one of us is back in Canaan with our dad. He's like, oh, well, how do I know that that's true? In fact, I want you guys to go. We're going to have you guys sit in prison for 3 days. This is the jailer, Bob. These are my my good-for-nothing brothers. Take care of them. All right, so for 3 days, they hang out in the prison. I don't know if the 3 days signifies 3 years. I don't know. It could, but they spend 3 days in jail. And the whole time, I wonder if Joseph was like, God, should we just kill him now? Or what should I do, right? I don't know. But he does something. He gets the brothers out, and he says, all right, check it out. Here's what I want. One of you guys is going to have to stay here, and the rest of you are going to go back. Here's what happens. Chapter 42, verse 21. Then they said to one another, in truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul. And they were going back to that moment when they threw him down the pit, when he begged us and we did not listen. So he's screaming, guys, don't do this. Come on, don't do this. And you have had too good of a life. It's time for you to go down. And we did not. And that is why this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them, did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood. And they did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. Then he turned away from them and wept. So Joseph is kind of listening to all this, and he's like, and he goes back, because these guys are kind of feeling sorry for what they did. Okay. And he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound them before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to replace every man's money in his sack and to give them provisions for their journey. This was done for them. Then they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed. So what happens is he kind of hears this conversation. He lets Reuben stay because he's the guy that didn't want to kill Joseph in the first place. And he takes the next oldest, Simeon, binds him up in front of them all, saying he is going to jail, and he puts him in jail. Then they head off. And as one of them opened his sack, so they're midway on the way back to Canaan, and as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money in the mouth of his sack. And he said to his brothers, my money's been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack. And at this, their hearts failed them. And they turned trembling to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? I want you to know this. The guilty, listen to me. I want you to think about this. The guilty are always very aware that their sins are not hidden from God. Let's just be real. Part of the reason that some of you haven't been to church in a while, can we just be honest? I'm just going to make you real. All right, so look at me for a second. Every time that you've walked into the church in the past, you felt instantly guilty. You don't even know why. And you think it's the people staring around judging you. No, it's not that, all right? Because nobody even knows you. They're so worried about what they look like today that, all right? It's that you are so kind of self-absorbed in the moment. You're just so worried that people are thinking things, saying things, judging left and right. And you're like, I'm not going to go to that place because I always feel bad. Because, isn't it true, then when you know that you're guilty, when there's something that you've kind of done wrong in your past, it kind of just catches up with you. And you start to just own that, and it hurts. When I gotten back from Iraq, and I was about a year had passed. So I was living in Dallas, going to seminary, and it was on my birthday. I'll never forget this. I get a phone call. I was at my dad's house. We were just kind of talking about, I don't know, whatever. And it was on my birthday, a phone call, and it's one of my soldiers. He was my driver. So you've got limo drivers, then you got like tank drivers. He was my tank driver. So we roll around the highway looking for bad guys. I'd be with a machine gun. He'd be driving. It was great. And so this guy, he calls me. He's like, sir! I mean, doesn't say who it is. He's like, sir, I got to tell you. And I'm like, hello? He's like, I got to get this off my chest. I've been holding on this for 2 years since this happened. It didn't go down like you thought it did. He didn't die. And he told me the whole story about one of my soldiers that had died. And the story was he had gotten off the tank for a normal thing. We get off tanks all the time in Iraq to go look for bad guys, to go check on something, go to the bathroom, whatever. You get off the tank. And so he had gotten off the tank, and we just kind of assumed it was one of those reasons. That was what the full death report was, and that was it. And this kid knew it was not like that. He's like, sir, here's what happened. His tank commander dared him to get off the tank and go pull up this. It was like a F Americans sign, we hate you, go home. And so he'd gone over to steal the sign and, take it home and mount it somewhere. And he said that one of his tank commanders told him, hey, I dare you, go get that sign. Okay. And so he gets off the tank, he goes over to the sign. As he pulls it up, boom, and he dies. And the soldier had been holding it in that he knew the truth, and he never told me, never told anybody, and it was like the secret. And so many of my men suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of that. Those that weren't even involved in the secret, but were involved in the cover-up, just felt so much guilt, so much shame. The guilty always are very aware of their sins. I promise you. Listen. If there's something in your heart and it's not right, and you're just it makes you. That's why you don't like to hang out with Christians. They start talking about Jesus and stuff. You're like, change the subject. Don't care. Don't want to hear it, because there's something inside you that it's not just a cool idea about God. It is a guilt thing for you. And it will rob your joy. And that's why you do three things. You alienate, you just kind of get out, I don't want to hear it. Or you isolate, you just kind of go, get into your own world. Or you medicate with a relationship, drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever. You will do whatever it takes not to feel the guilt. Again, because every time that moment of sobriety comes in, or that moment of clarity comes, you just start to overwhelm with that. The guilty are always aware that their sins are not hidden from God. So here's what happens. The brothers all leave. So they get back to Jacob, and Jacob's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There were 10 of you guys. And the brother's like, well, I got good news and bad news. Good news, we got grain to eat, food, and we got a ton of extra cash. Bad news is Simeon is still down there. Didn't quite go as we planned. And Jacob's got to be thinking, every time I send these guys away, I have more money and one less brother. A little bit of human trafficking going on here. We got to make sure this got to quell that thing. All right, so so Jacob's kind of furious. Why did you tell him that you had another brother? Why did you fall? And everyone's like, we didn't know. I mean, who would think that he would ask that? And they're like, okay, so we need to go back and get Simeon. We got to go back and get him. And so Reuben's like, Dad, we got to go back. He's like, no, I'm not sending Benjamin back there. He said, no, if we don't bring Benjamin back, he won't give us Simeon. He's like, well, stuff happens. And Reuben's like, no, I will, listen, if I don't bring him back, I'll kill my 2 sons to kind of make up for it. That's great logic, right? You're like, yeah, you know what? If I lost another son, killing your 2 sons, which are my grandsons, that would make up for it perfectly. Thanks, Reuben. That's really insightful. And so he kind of ignores that plan, and everyone's like, Dad, we got Simeon. He's like, hey, I'm not sending Benjamin. He's my favorite kid from my favorite wife. Deal with it. So time passes, and Jacob gets hungry. He's like, hey, what are we doing sitting around? Someone go back. Yes, go back down there. And Judah's like, look, Dad, the last time we went down there, the dude in charge made it pretty clear. Do not come back here without your brother. If we don't bring Benjamin, we're not coming back. And then Judah, you start to see a change in Judah. Like, remember, the brothers were always sorry. They felt sorry, but they weren't repentant. Did you know there's a difference between being sorry and being repentant? Being sorry means like, oh, I'm sorry, and then you'd like go and do it again. You just feel bad for a while, and then you do the same thing over. Like if some of you like, I just confessed my sins, I felt bad about it, and then I went and did it again. So, right? No. So that's sorry. Repentant is like a change in your action, a change in your attitude. Like there's an actual change. And so here's Judah. He's like, Dad, listen, I will bear the blame for your boy if we do not bring him back. I will bear the blame forever. I'm not going to kill anybody else. We got to go and get Benjamin. Or we got to go and get Simeon. We're not going to survive without this. And so Jacob finally is like, you know what? If I perish, I perish, and I'll just be sad. So he sends the 10 kids now with Benjamin back down to Joseph. And Joseph hears that they're there, and he's like, okay, tells like his little posse, hey, take them all over to my house, and we're going to line them up by age order. And it's going to be pretty freaky when all of a sudden they're lined up by age order, and it'll be a kind of funny joke. And he gets in there, right? And so now it's dinner time, and Joseph is going to have dinner with these guys. So when Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that the brothers had with him and bowed down to him to the ground. So second time they bowed down to Joseph. Remember he had 2 dreams about his brothers bowing down to him? Here it is, fulfillment again. And he inquired about their welfare and said, is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? And they said, your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive. And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. And if you're not prostrate, it's just like you lay down, you're like, I am not worthy. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son. And then he can't hold it any longer. I mean, the emotion is just, think about this. He hasn't seen his brother in about 20 years or so. And the last time he saw his brother, he might have been 2 or 4 years old. And like, he just is like, that's my brother, man. I've been thinking about my brother, and he's been with these brothers that are like the evil stepbrothers. And you can kind of just see like, if you think you have issues with your stepbrothers, well, he's got issues, right? So like he's kind of anger wells up, and he's just wondering how he's doing. He has to have a moment to himself. So he walks out of the room. He just has a good cry. No time for therapy. He just loses it. And then he comes back. He washed his face, and he came out, and controlling himself, he said, serve the food. And they served him by himself, and then them by themselves, the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. So we're serious racism here, right? This is what Joseph had to endure like his whole life. Like they hated him, they were racist, and they didn't care. Like it was an abomination to sit at the same table and eat with each other. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement, like, how did he know? And portions were taken to them from Joseph's table. Now watch this. This is what's so neat. But Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him. Now, this is important. I want you, because sometimes you kind of read it, you're like, and they drink them rare. No. Benjamin gets 5 times as much. He's been the favorite kid his whole life. He probably had a coat of many colors as well, and he kind of grew up being daddy's favorite. And instead of going, oh, well, Benji, looks like you get 5 times as much. That's going to be like a couple extra noogies when we get back. They don't. They drank and they were merry with him. Who's the him? Benjamin. You see, they had learned, like they had a weird family situation, just like many of us have some really weird family situations. And instead of being envious of their brother, they started to love their brother. Instead of being like, man, that freaking kid, they were like, oh, good for you. Good on you, Benjamin. How about 5 times as much? Awesome. See, something had happened in their hearts where they weren't trying to compete against one another. They were now trying to be supportive with one another. And isn't that true for us? Listen, and this happens at church a lot. And you'll do the Facebook thing, and you'll like hate on everybody over Facebook when they have like good news, and like you're like, I'll kill them, right? I mean, you kind of like you do that in your head, right? You're just like, what is wrong? How come they kind of have good stuff and I kind of get the cruddy stuff? Like, how'd that happen? And you're just like, and of course we're all just doing like Facebook, putting the best stuff out there. Nobody puts like, my life's ruined today, But I want you to kind of move from the place, just like these brothers. These brothers had to move from a place in their heart where they're just trying to compete and compare to a place where they could celebrate the victories and the goodness that they ate and they drank and they were merry with Benjamin. All right, watch this. And so now, all of a sudden, these brothers, they get all the food and Joseph's really kind to them, and now Joseph is going to test them. This is kind of chapter 44. And I always wonder, why does Joseph do this weird testing thing? Is he like not quite over it yet? And does he kind of want to like, just kidding, now you're free, no you're not? Like I always thought about, like, why do you do that? But here's what, when I thought about this in this past week, Joseph's about to do something to kind of test his brother's repentance. Are they sorry or are they repentant? He's going to get his brother back no matter what, because he loves his brother. And so he devises a plan. He's going to have his brother convicted of a crime he didn't commit. And so he stuffs a silver goblet in their sacks as they're about to leave. And so, all the brothers, the 11 brothers are heading back to Canaan, like, woo, high-fiving each other. Can you believe that all that happened? Wasn't that cool? Awesome times. And then all of a sudden the police come out in the pot, like, woo, and, so you got, they have horses and, like, sirens. I'm not sure how that happened, but they did. So they got everyone there, and they say, so one of you stole the silver goblet of Joseph. And so they're like, no, we didn't, promise. In fact, if whoever stole it, that man will die. I'm like, all right, open up sacks. So they open up everybody's sacks, and Benjamin has the silver cup, and all the men are like, they start tearing their clothes, like, no! It's like, what? And here's the test. Here's why Joseph's testing him, right? And he's going to say, and the police are like, check it out. None of you guys stole it. We're only going to take Benjamin to be our servant and slave forever. And here's the test. If he goes back, then Joseph gets his brother back. And it's happy times. He's saved from the evil stepbrothers, and he gets to be with them forever. But if they're repentant, they're not going to let that happen. They're going to come back and plead with Joseph. And Joseph knows that. And so all the brothers, their hearts have changed. They're like, we can't let this happen. Our dad, they started thinking about other people. They thought about ministering to their father. They started being others focused. This is our number one problem. We get so me. We alienate, isolate, medicate, right? And instead of doing that, they started kind of own their own sin. Like, we can't do that. We got to go. He did not steal it. I know he didn't steal it. We're going to go back and we're going to go plead with the man. And so they go back. And Judah comes to Joseph. He's like, and remember, Judah was the guy that had the great idea of selling Joseph to Pharaoh, or to the Ishmaelites, that eventually made him a slave. And so Judah's like, listen, trade me for Benjamin. I will take on the guilt of that boy. I cannot bear to see my dad again and him just weep because his son didn't return to him. Man. And that's where Joseph loses it. Because his brothers finally got it. His brothers were no longer so self-focused and kind of into themselves that they were just kind of ridiculously selfish. They had changed. And Judah was willing to bear imprisonment, the dungeon, for his brother. And at this point, this is where Joseph can stand it no longer. Watch this. Chapter 45. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, make everyone go away from me. And so, everyone's in the palace, and they're used to kind of Joseph being pretty even-keeled, and they're like, and so they leave. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph! Is my father still alive? Oh, man. But his brothers could not answer him. They were kind of in freaked out mode. For they were dismayed at his presence. That's probably an understatement of the year. Like, that's I'm sort of dismayed that my brother that we thought we killed and threw into slavery is now standing before me as the powerful ruler of all Egypt. It's like, oh, we're dead men. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me. And they're like, and they came near. And he said, I'm your brother Joseph. You know, the one you sold into slavery? Oh, yeah, that Joseph. Totally, God, how's things been? Yeah, you look like you're doing pretty good for yourself. Now, and then he shifts it, watch. He goes, and now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land for 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God has sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. What? Who can say that? Who has got the perspective to say, like, my entire 13 years of absolute misery as a slave in a place that considered me like not even, oh, we don't eat with you because you're Hebrew. And as a prisoner in a dungeon, he's like, oh, that was all God's doing. Don't worry about it. It's cool. So it's not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord over all his house and ruler over the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. Do not wait. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen. You shall be near me, you and your children's children, and your flocks and your herd and all that you have. There I will, what? Provide for you. Yeah, the guys that tried to kill me, ruined my entire life. I am going to provide for you because I forgive you. For there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it's my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father of all my honor in Egypt and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here. Then, so he's just kind of just exploded with like a little monologue. And then he grabs his brother Benjamin. I mean, he hasn't seen him in 20 years, and he just, my brother. And he cries and he weeps, and this is this reunion that's really sweet. And Benjamin's bawling his eyes out, and it's like man cards are out the window. They don't even care. And he kissed all his brothers. No, it's not just Benjamin. All his brothers, and he wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. And they just kind of sat down. They just talked about life. And they just talked about all the stuff. And man, I can't believe this, Joseph. Oh my gosh, I know I stole your gerbil in the 5th grade and I put him in the garbage disposal. I'm sorry. There were moments that stuff happened. They just kind of went through life and kind of asked for forgiveness. And it was just this beautiful, beautiful moment. See, listen to me. Joseph did what anyone would do when faced with the ultimate opportunity for revenge. Because he was confident that God was with him. Now, I want you to think about this. Because listen, there's some people that need some revenge. I mean, right? Like, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and he needs a little help from me. Right? Isn't that how we kind of roll? We're just like, you think you got away with that, don't you? Oh, you didn't. Oh, I'm going to get you. Like there's that part of you, like doesn't matter who you are, there's like deep down, unless you've come to understand this amazing thing of grace. And as I read the story, I was like, where in the world did Joseph get the capacity to forgive like that? I mean, what? I get that he was confident that God was with him, but this is unbelievable. And I started reading through his whole story. And his story really starts before Genesis 37. It starts in Genesis 33. And he's mentioned there. And when I read it, it just flooded me. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Watch this. This is how Joseph learned how to forgive. Genesis 33. This is Jacob and Esau. So his daddy, Jacob, didn't really get along with Uncle Esau too well. In fact, Uncle Esau wanted to kill Jacob because Jacob stole his birthright inheritance, pretty much anything good in his life, right? And so he vowed, I will kill Jacob. It's the last thing I do. And then God tells Jacob, go back to Canaan. Go back and make this thing right. Go back. And so Jacob's heading home, and earlier in this chapter it says, or earlier in Genesis it says, Esau had 400 men with him, but they were armed. Then Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. Why did he mention Joseph? Why? Because this next line is going to tell it all. Here's Joseph. He's, 5, 6 years old? Maybe it's his first memory. And he watched, everyone's afraid. Everyone thinks they're going to die. Everyone thinks that Esau is going to come and slaughter him with their 400 men. And Jacob isn't wanting to fight. He's just saying, like, God's going to take care of us. And this next line just blew me away as I kind of thought about the forgiveness that Joseph showed. Watch this. He himself, Jacob, went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau, Uncle Esau, ran to meet Daddy Jacob and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. The best lessons in life, listen to me, the best lessons in life are caught, not taught. You know why it's important that you need to forgive? Moms, dads? Because your kids are watching. Your kids are watching how you reconcile stuff. Your kids are watching, they're saying, they don't know anything. And you are imprinting upon their little brains how it is that you get along, how it is that you forgive, how it is that you are sharing this hope that you have. So listen. So when you scream at each other and you're like, oh yeah, you, and they're like, you say stuff you know you don't mean. And then you say, hey, I blew it. Will you forgive me? And you cry and you weep, you say, hey, I blew it. And your kids see that, they're starting to learn. They're learning how to forgive. But if you show them that the way you handle it is you just medicate, alienate, or isolate, you know what they're going to do? Medicate, alienate, or isolate. Every time. Every time. You train a child in the way they will go. And later, when they have no life skills to lean on, but other than what they saw you do, they'll learn to forgive. You're teaching them how to forgive. Listen to me, this is huge. Because some of you guys, listen, let's be real. Like the anger that you hold, because it's towards your parents, you just kind of watch them disintegrate right in front of you. You're like, well, I guess that's what you do. Alienate. You just strike out against them and be like, screw you. You isolate. You just kind of run. Get away. Or you medicate. Sex, drinking, relationships that go nowhere, whatever. Every time. You saw it happen right before you, and that's why you do it. But listen. What if you were confident that God was with you? You could change that. And you wouldn't have to live out the disaster of maybe you saw your parents, or you wouldn't have to live out the disaster of previous years. You could be the change agent because of the grace that you receive from God. See, listen, every time you see this picture of this forgiveness, of not deserving forgiveness, but they give it, you see a picture of Jesus going to the cross, dying for you who do not deserve it. I don't deserve it. My life is too messed up. Your life is too messed up. You did not deserve forgiveness, and yet he goes to the cross saying, I am dying for you and 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 you because I love you. And you don't deserve it. Nothing you can do to earn it, but it's in my heart because I love you so much. For the joy set before me, I want to see you in heaven, have a relationship with you forever. Oh, yeah. And so that's why when we hear the gospel, that's why we weep and get all crazy and like, oh man. Because we can't believe that we've been loved like that. So I want to ask you this. Listen, what would you do? No, think about this. What would you do when faced with the ultimate opportunity? When faced with the ultimate opportunity for revenge, if you were confident that God was with you. No, think about all those people. Think about, like, all of a sudden they're going to come back and they need something now, and choose the other foot now, isn't it? Right? And you have the opportunity to just kind of Stick it to him. What are you going to do? What would you do if you're confident that God was with you? Oh, think about it. Everyone pull out your little bulletin thingy. Do you guys have that? Pull out your bulletin thingy. Raise it in the air. Put it in the air. Yeah, put it high. Put it high. I need to see everyone. All right, see that? That's called a bulletin program. I don't know what they are. They're a piece of paper that we hand out. All right. On it is a little prayer request part. All right. I want you to write on there, who is it? Listen to me. Who is it that you need to forgive? I want you to write that name down. I want you to write that name down. And as we're going to be taking communion this morning, and I want you to write that name down. And as you write that name down, what I want you to think about is like the hurt and the pain. In fact, I want everyone to just kind of close your eyes for a second. I want you to envision the person whose name you're about to write down or you've written down. And I want you to kind of go back to that place where they hurt you. Some of you, it's your dad. Some of you might be even your mom. Some of you, it's a brother, sister. It's somebody that you did business with, somebody that was a friend or used to be a friend. Maybe it was an ex-wife, ex-husband. Maybe it was somebody that really violently hurt you. Turned your life from a place where it was going well, and all of a sudden that was the left turn of pain and hurt and anger and shame and all that stuff. And I want you to go back to that person, and I want you to, in that moment right now, I want you to forgive them like Jesus forgave you.